All right, this is the short story called Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl. So, above where it says about this text, Roald Dahl, 1916 to 1990, was a British novelist, short story writer, and poet. Dahl's books and stories are known for their unexpected endings and often darkly comic themes. In this short story, Dahl describes a woman's reaction when her husband comes home with surprising news. So, if you've ever heard of James and the Giant Peach, it's a movie and a book, or you've heard of the book Matilda, or it is also a movie. They did a couple of remakes on that. Roald Dahl is actually the author. Purpose for reading: to understand how authors build suspense through their use of dramatic irony and different points of view. All right, so we're going to start where it says whole class reading, and I'll kind of stop here and there and read the during reading questions. And you can pause this on your own or however you're listening, pause in order to answer these questions. Here we go. The room was warm and clean, the curtains drawn, the two table lamps alight, hers and the one by the empty chair opposite. On the sideboard behind her, two tall glasses, soda water, whiskey, fresh ice cubes in the thermos bucket. Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. Now and again she would glance up at the clock, but without anxiety, merely to please herself with the thought that each minute gone by made it nearer the time that he would come. There was a slow, smiling air about her and about everything she did. The drop of a head as she bent over her sewing was curiously tranquil. Her skin, for this was her 6th month with child, had acquired a wonderful translucent quality. The mouth was soft, and the eyes, with their new placid look, seemed larger and darker than before. So remember when you see those numbers, so translucent has a 1 next to it, placid has a 2 next to it. Remember, if you look below, that's kind of giving you a guide of what those words mean. And if you didn't catch it, when it says, for this was her 6th month with child, that doesn't mean that she's carrying around a 6-month-old baby in her arms. It means that she is 6 months pregnant. When the clock said 10 minutes to 5, she began to listen, and a few moments later, punctually as always, she heard the tires on the gravel outside, and the car door slamming, the footsteps passing the window, the key turning in the lock. She laid aside her sewing, stood up, and went forward to kiss him as he came in. "Hello, darling," she said. "Hello, darling," he answered. Okay, let's take a look really quickly. On the right-hand side where it says during reading questions, it says paragraph 3. Find evidence. So remember, one of the big things that we're working with this short story unit is being able to express our opinion, say what our thoughts are, but we need to back it up with evidence from the text. So this is a great practice. It says underline 3 details that describe Mary's attitude and feelings as she waits for her husband. So we should know, like if we go through here, she's not waiting, like she's not annoyed that he's not home. She's so excited that he is coming back, right? If I look at paragraph 3, because that's where all of this evidence is going to come from, where are you going to find information about how she feels, okay, as she waits for her husband? I look in the first line where it says, now and again she would glance up at the clock, but without anxiety, merely to please herself with the thought that each minute gone by made it nearer the time he would come. I would underline that because she's excited that he's coming. All right, I'm going to keep going. Pause this if you need more time. She took his coat and hung it in the closet, and then she walked over and made the drinks, a strongish one for him, a weak one for herself, and soon she was back again in her chair with the sewing, and he in the other, opposite, holding the tall glass with both hands, rocking it so the ice cubes tinkled against the side. So remember, this story is written in the 1950s. 1950s gender roles stereotypically was very different than what is happening now. And so Mary is a housewife. She does not work. And her main job, I shouldn't say she doesn't work. She does not have a job outside of the house. But her main job is to cook and to clean and just make sure that her husband is truly happy. And the fact that she's pregnant as well again in the 1950s, yes, she mixed a drink for her husband, a strongish one for him, and a weak one for herself. And this was actually normal during the 1950s, and even way before that too, for women to have small drinks while they were pregnant. And this is not something, they've done lots of research, right? And we get better the more we know. This is not something we do now. All right. For her, this was always a blissful time of day. She knew he didn't want to speak much until the first drink was finished. And she, on her side, was content to sit quietly, enjoying his company after the long hours alone in the house. She loved to luxuriate in the presence of this man and to feel, almost as a sunbather feels the sun, that warm male glow that came out of him to her when they were alone together. She loved him for the way he sat loosely in a chair, for the way he came in a door, moved slowly across the room with long strides. She loved the intent, far look in his eyes when they rested on her, the funny shape of his mouth, and especially the way he remained silent about his tiredness, sitting still with himself until the whiskey had taken some of it away. Okay, paragraphs 3 through 7, so you're going to have to go back into the text. And this says turn and talk. Yes, you are free to do that, but you also need to write down your answer. How does Mary feel about her husband? So you can kind of go back into the text and see, how does she feel about her husband? All right, paragraph 8. Tired, darling? Yes, he said, I'm tired. And as he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted his glass and drained it in one swallow, although there was still half of it, at least half of it left. She wasn't really watching him, but she knew what he had done because she heard the ice cubes falling back against the bottom of the empty glass when he lowered his arm. He paused a moment, leaning forward in the chair, and then he got up and he went slowly over to fetch himself another. I'll get it, she cried, jumping up. Sit down, he said. When he came back, she noticed that the new drink was dark amber with the quantity of whiskey in it. Darling, shall I get your slippers? No. She watched him as she began to sip in the dark yellow drink, and she could see little oily swirls in the liquid because it was so strong. I think it's a shame, she said, that when a policeman gets to be as senior as you, they keep him walking about on his feet all day long. He didn't answer, and so she bent her head again and went on with her sewing. But each time he lifted the drink to his lips, she heard the ice cubes clinking against the side of the glass. Darling, she said, would you like me to get you some cheese? I haven't made any supper because it's Thursday. No, he said. If you're too tired to eat out, she went on, it's still not too late. There's plenty of meat and stuff in the freezer. You can have it right here and not even move out of your chair. Her eyes waited on him for an answer, a smile, a little nod, but he made no sign. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Take a look at the right-hand side where it says paragraphs 10 through 23. I only read through 21, so you might have to go a little bit further. But you're going to write, how do Mary and her husband act differently toward one another? Right? So Mary's so excited. She's been waiting all day for her husband to come back from work. Did you catch what he does for a living? He is a policeman. So she's been waiting for him all day. It's like the thing that she looks forward to. She wants to help him. She wants him to sit down. She wants him to relax. She wants to make him dinner and do all of these things, right? And she keeps asking the questions. And what does he respond with? And that might be your answer to how do Mary and her husband act differently toward one another. All right, paragraph 22. Anyway, she went on, I'll get you some cheese and crackers first. I don't want it, he said. She moved uneasily in her chair, the large eyes still watching his face. But you must eat. I'll fix it anyway, and then you can have it or not as you like. She stood up and placed her sewing on the table by the lamp. Sit down, he said. Just for a minute. Sit down. It wasn't till then that she began to get frightened. Go on, he said. Sit down. She lowered herself back slowly into the chair, watching him all the time with those large, bewildered eyes. He had finished the second drink and was staring down into the glass, frowning. Okay, paragraph 24 through 29. How has this conversation between Mary and her husband affected her? Okay, how does Mary, you can probably infer, so you're using an educated guess. How does Mary feel about the way that her husband has talked to her, the words that he has said? All right, paragraph 30. Listen, he said, I've got something to tell you. What is it, darling? What's the matter? He had now become absolutely motionless, and he kept his head down so that the light from the lamp beside him fell across the upper part of his face, leaving the chin and mouth in shadow. She noticed there was a little muscle moving near the corner of his eye. This is going to be a bit of a shock to you, I'm afraid, he said. But I've thought about it a good deal, and I've decided the only thing to do is to tell you right away. I hope you won't blame me too much. And he told her. It didn't take long, 4 or 5 minutes at most, and she sat very still through it all, watching him with a kind of dazed horror as he went further and further away from her with each word. So there it is, he added. And I know it's the kind of a bad time to be telling you, but there simply wasn't any other way. Of course, I'll give you money and see you're looked after, but there needn't really be any fuss. I hope not, anyway. It wouldn't be very good for my job. All right, it says paragraphs 33 through 35. So we just read those. Using your inferencing skills, kind of knowing background knowledge, what do you think Mary's husband has told her? And then, so that we don't have any nana nana boo boo answers, right? You need to have evidence to back up your thoughts. B says, find evidence, underlined 3 details that support your conclusion. And again, you can pause this along the way. I am going to keep going. Paragraph 36. Her first instinct was not to believe any of it, to reject it all. It occurred to her that perhaps he hadn't even spoken, that she herself had imagined the whole thing. Maybe, if she went about her business and acted as though she hadn't been listening, then later, when she sort of woke up again, she might find none of it had ever happened. I'll get the supper, she managed to whisper, and this time he didn't stop her. When she walked across the room, she couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything at all, except a slight nausea and a desire to vomit. Everything was automatic now. Down the steps to the cellar, the light switch, the deep freeze, the hand inside the cabinet taking hold of the first object it met. She lifted it out and looked at it. It was wrapped in paper, so she took off the paper and looked at it again. A leg of lamb. All right, then. They would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs, holding the thin bone end of it with both her hands, and as she went through the living room, she saw him standing over by the window with his back to her, and she stopped. For God's sakes, he said, hearing her, but not turning around, don't make supper for me. I'm going out. At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him, and without any pause, she swung the big frozen leg of lamb high in the air and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might just as well have hit him with a steel club. She stepped back a pace, waiting, and the funny thing was that he remained standing there for at least 4 or 5 seconds, gently swaying, and then he crashed to the carpet. The violence of the crash, the noise, the small table overturning, helped bring her out of the shock. She came out slowly, feeling cold and surprised, and she stood for a while blinking at the body, still holding the ridiculous piece of meat tight with both hands. All right, she told herself, so I've killed him. All right, it says poll the class for paragraphs 40 through 46. You guys can talk about it if you want to, depending on kind of how you're doing this lesson. But in your opinion, who is more responsible for the murder? Was it Mary, the wife, or Patrick, the husband? Be prepared to defend your response. So you can circle that, and then we can talk about this when I get back. But who do you think is more responsible for the murder? Was it Mary? She was the one that swung this leg of lamb over the back of her husband's head that killed him. Or was it Patrick? Because whatever he told her upset her enough that she made this decision. All right, paragraph 47. It was extraordinary now how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? What were the laws about murderers with their unborn children? Did they kill them both, mother and child, or did they wait until the 10th month? What did they do? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she certainly wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in a pan, turned the oven on high, and shoved it inside. And then she washed her hands and ran upstairs to the bedroom. She sat down before the mirror, tidied her hair, and touched up her lips and face. She tried a smile. It came out rather peculiar. She tried again. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly aloud. The voice sounded peculiar, too. "I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas." That was better. Both the smile and the voice were coming out better now. She rehearsed it several times more, and then she ran downstairs, took her coat, went out the back door, down the garden, into the street. It wasn't 6 o'clock yet, and the lights were still on in the grocery shop. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, smiling at the man behind the counter. "Why, good evening, Mrs. Maloney. How are you?" Okay. Find your evidence. Back up your thoughts. It says underline 3 details that show the actions Mary takes after she murders her husband. So 3 different things. What does she do after she murders her husband? Paragraph 57. "I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas." The man turned and reached up behind him on the shelf for the peas. Patrick's decided he's tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out Thursdays, you know, and now he's caught me without any vegetables in the house." "Then how about meat, Miss Maloney?" "No, I've got meat, thanks. I got a nice leg of lamb from the freezer." "Oh, I don't much like cooking it frozen, Sam, but I'm taking a chance on it this time. You think it'll be all right?" "Personally," the grocer said, "I don't believe it makes any difference. You want these Idaho potatoes?" "Oh, yes, that'll be fine. 2 of those. Anything else?" The grocer cocked his head on one side, looking at her pleasantly. "How about afterwards?" "What are you going to give him afterwards?" "Well, what would you suggest, Sam?" The man glanced around his shop. "How about a big slice of cheesecake? I know he likes that." "Perfect," she said. "He loves it." And when it was all wrapped and she had paid, she put on her brightest smile and said, "Thank you, Sam. Good night." "Good night, Mrs. Maloney, and thank you." All right, so take a look at the right-hand side where it says dramatic irony. Remember, irony is when we think one thing is going to happen and the opposite does. So this one says, during their conversation, Mary says to Sam, "Patrick's decided that he's tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight." What do Mary and the reader know that Sam does not? And then where it says B, how does this dramatic irony impact the reader? You guys can skip that one. All right, paragraph 72. And now, she told herself as she hurried back, all she was doing now, she was returning home to her husband, and he was waiting for his supper, and she must cook it good and make it as tasty as possible because the poor man was tired. And if, when she entered the house, she happened to find anything unusual or tragic or terrible, then naturally it would be a shock, and she'd become frantic with grief and horror. Mind you, she wasn't expecting to find anything. She was just going home with the vegetables. Mrs. Patrick Maloney going home with the vegetables on Thursday evening to cook supper for her husband. That's the way she told herself. Do everything right and natural. Keep things absolutely natural, and there will be no need for any acting at all. Therefore, when she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was humming a little tune to herself and smiling. "Patrick," she called. "How are you, darling?" She put the parcel down on the table and went through into the living room. And when she saw him lying on the floor with his legs doubled up and one arm twisted back underneath his body, it really was rather a shock. Okay, Take a look on the right-hand side, paragraph 72 through 82. I know we haven't gotten through the whole entire thing, but what is the motive behind Mary's actions? Remember, a motive is like the reason. Why is she pretending that nothing happened? What's the point? What's her reasoning? All the old love and longing for him welled up inside of her, and she ran over to him, knelt down beside him, began to cry her heart out. It was easy. No acting was necessary. A few minutes later, she got up and went to the phone. She knew the number of the police station, and when the man at the other end answered, she cried to him, "Quick! Come quick! Patrick's dead!" "Who's speaking?" "Mrs. Maloney. Mrs. Patrick Maloney." "You mean Patrick Maloney's dead?" "I think so," she sobbed. "He's lying on the floor, and I think he's dead." "Be right over," the man said. The car came very quickly, and when she opened the front door, 2 policemen walked in. She knew them both. She knew nearly all the men at the precinct, and she fell right into the chair, then went over to join the other one, who was called O'Malley, kneeling by the body. "Is he dead?" she cried. "I'm afraid he is. What happened?" Briefly, she told her story about going to the grocer and coming back to find him on the floor. While she was talking, crying, and talking, Noonan discovered a small patch of congealed blood on the dead man's head. He showed it to O'Malley, who got up at once and hurried to the phone. Soon, other men began to come into the house. First a doctor, then 2 detectives, one of whom she knew by name. Later, a police photographer arrived and took pictures, and a man who knew about fingerprints. There was a great deal of whispering and muttering besides the corpse, and the detectives kept asking her a lot of questions, but they always treated her kindly. She told her story again, this time right from the beginning, when Patrick had come in and she was sewing and he was tired, so tired he hadn't wanted to go out for supper, and she told how she put the meat in the oven. It's there now, cooking. And how she'd slipped out to the grocer for vegetables and come back to find him lying on the floor. "Which grocer?" one of the detectives asked. She told him, and he turned and whispered something to the other detective, who immediately went outside into the street. Okay, on the right-hand side where it says think and share, and you can just kind of write something small here. What do Mary and the readers know about the meat in the oven that the detectives do not? Where it says, how does this dramatic irony build suspense? You guys can skip that question. All right, paragraph 88. "Which grocer?" one of the detectives said. She told him, and he turned and whispered something to the other detective, who immediately went outside into the street. In 15 minutes, he was back with a page of notes, and there was more whispering, and through her sobbing, she heard a few of the whispered phrases. Acted quite normal, very cheerful. Wanted to give him a good supper, peas, cheesecake. Impossible that she. After a while, the photographer and the doctor departed, and 2 other men came in and took the corpse away on a stretcher. Okay, paragraphs 88 through 91. Why did the detectives need to know the grocer that Mary visited? What do you think they're doing with this? Then the fingerprint man went away. The 2 detectives remained, and so did the 2 policemen. They were exceptionally nice to her, and Jack Noonan asked if she wouldn't rather go somewhere else, to her sister's house perhaps, or to his own wife, who would take care of her and put her up for the night. "No," she said. She didn't feel she could move even a yard at the moment. Would they mind awfully if she stayed just where she was until she felt better? She didn't feel too good at the moment. She really didn't. "Then hadn't she better lie down on the bed?" Jack Noonan asked. "No," she said. She'd like to stay right where she was, in this chair. A little later, perhaps, when she felt better, she would move. And so they left her there while they went about their business, searching the house. Occasionally, one of the detectives asked her another question. Sometimes Jack Noonan spoke at her gently as he passed by. Her husband, he told her, had been killed by a blow on the back of the head administered by a heavy, blunt instrument, almost certainly a large piece of metal. They were looking for the weapon. The murderer may have taken it with him, but on the other hand, he may have thrown it away or hidden it somewhere on the premises. Okay, pause where it says think and share. You're going to write this down. How does the visit to the grocer change the detective's behaviors toward Mary? So once the detective comes back from the grocery man, Sam tells the detective, she got cheesecake, she was cheerful, it's impossible that she did anything. How did they then start treating her, the detectives? Okay, paragraph 96. It's the old story, he said. Get the weapon, and you've got the man. And by the way, remember, they're thinking that what was the actual weapon? It says a large piece of metal. I want you to think of sometimes people put cold packs in the freezer, not the jelly cold packs, but actual cold packs that you would put on if you have a sprained or something like that. Those things can get really, really hard. Or if you've ever frozen meat in your freezer, it's rock. So think of that being whacked over the back of somebody's head. Later, one of the detectives came up and sat beside her. Did she know, he asked, of anything in the house that could have been used as the weapon? Would she mind having a look around to see if anything was missing? A very big spanner, for example, or a heavy metal vase? They didn't have any heavy metal vases, she said. Or a big spanner? She didn't think she had a big spanner, but there might be some things like that in the garage. Remember, what the heck is a spanner? If you look at the very bottom, it says it is a wrench. All right, we are skipping the dramatic irony because it's really just not what we're going to focus on with this unit. But where it says turn and talk, when the detective Jack Noonan says, get the weapon and you've got the man, what does he make the reader think might happen? All right, paragraph 101. The search went on. She knew that there were other policemen in the garden all around the house. She could hear their footsteps on the gravel outside, and sometimes she saw a flash of a torch through the chink in the curtains. It began to get late. Nearly 9, she noticed by the clock on the mantel. The 4 men searching the rooms seemed to be growing weary, a trifle exasperated. Jack, she said, the next time Sergeant Noonan went by, would you mind giving me a drink? Sure, I'll give you a drink. You mean this whiskey? Yes, please, but just a small one. It might make me feel better. Remember, this was normal during this time. We would not do this now if somebody is pregnant. You don't drink. He handed her the glass. Why don't you have one yourself, she said. You must be awfully tired. Please do. You've been very good to me. Well, he answered, it's not strictly allowed, but I might just take a drop to keep me going. One by one, the others came in and were persuaded to take a little nip of whiskey. They stood around rather awkwardly with their drinks in their hands, uncomfortable in her presence, trying to say consoling things to her. Sergeant Noonan wandered into the kitchen, came out quickly and said, Look, Mrs. Maloney, you know that oven of yours is still on and the meat is still inside. Oh, dear me, she cried, so it is. I better turn it off for you, hadn't I? Will you do that, Jack? Thank you so much. When the sergeant returned the second time, she looked at him with her large, dark, tearful eyes. Jack Noonan, she said. Yes? Would you do me a small favor? You and these others? We can try, Mrs. Maloney. Well, she said, here you all are, and good friends of dear Patrick's too, and helping to catch the man who killed him. You must be terrible hungry by now, because it's long past your supper time, and I know Patrick would never forgive me, God bless his soul, if I allowed you to remain in his house without offering you decent hospitality. Why don't you eat up that lamb that's in the oven? It'll be cooked just right by now. Wouldn't dream of it, Sergeant Noonan said. Please, she begged, please eat it. Personally, I couldn't touch a thing. Certainly not what's been in the house when he was here, but it's all right for you. It'd be a favor to me if you'd eat it up, and then you can go on with your work again afterwards. All right, stop. Let's take a look. Paragraphs 101 through 118. Question is, why do you think Mary is really being hospitable to the police officers by offering them food or drink? So why do you think Mary is being kind to them? Why is she showing them hospitality by offering these things? All right. And then it also says, how do Mary's offers to the police officers build suspense? So she's offering food, she's offering drink. Why might we feel a little suspenseful by her offering this? Remember, how did she kill her husband and with what? All right. There was a good deal of hesitating among the 4 policemen, but they were clearly hungry, and in the end they were persuaded to go into the kitchen and help themselves. The woman stayed where she was, listening to them speaking among themselves, their voices thick and sloppy because their mouths were full of meat. Have some more, Charlie? No, better not finish it. She wants us to finish it. She said so. Be doing her a favor. Okay, then. Give me some more. That's a heck of a big club the guy must have used to hit poor Patrick, one of them was saying. The doc says his skull was smashed all to pieces just like from a sledgehammer. That's why it ought to be easy to find. Exactly what I said. Whoever done it, they're not going to be carrying a thing like that around with them any longer than needed. One of them belched. Personally, I think it's right here on the premises. Probably right under our very noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mary Maloney began to giggle. Okay, let's take a look where it says A, find evidence. Underline 3 details that revealed the detectives' beliefs about the murder weapon. What do they think the murder weapon was? And then skip B, where it says explain why this is dramatic irony. And then take a look at the last one. It says, do you agree that Mary should have gotten away with her crime? Be prepared to defend your response. And hopefully, I'm assuming you guys all caught on to this or whatever, but the last line where it says, and in the other room, Mary Maloney began to giggle. Because remember, they keep talking about if you find the murder weapon, then you will find the murderer. Well, are they going to find the murder weapon? And the answer is no, because they are eating it. Hope you enjoyed that.